Introduction. Justice in Redstone. The Wyoming Territory in the late 1800s was a land of untamed beauty and relentless danger. Rugged mountains and sprawling plains stretched as far as the eye could see, but beneath the breathtaking landscapes lay a harsh reality. Lawlessness thrived in the shadows, and survival often depended on grit, determination, and the strength of a community. In the small frontier town of Redstone, where the winds carried whispers of both hope and despair, the line between justice and chaos was razor thin. At the heart of this story is Emily Batten, a fiercely independent rancher determined to protect her family's legacy, the Big B Ranch, from the threats that loom over the town. Alongside her brother, Marshal Elias Gray, she fights to uphold the fragile law in a place where outlaws like Caleb Halston and his gang test the limits of justice. But Redstone is more than just a battleground for law and order. It's a place where lives intertwine, secrets are revealed, and sparks of love and loyalty ignite in the most unexpected ways. As the trial of the notorious Halston gang unfolds, the town gathers to witness a reckoning that will shape its future. Judge Mallory Wiley, a woman of unyielding resolve, presides over the courtroom, determined to prove that justice can prevail even in the wildest corners of the West. But beyond the courthouse walls, the people of Redstone face their own battles. Caleb Boone, a skilled tracker with a quiet strength, finds himself drawn to Emily, while Walker Wiley, a drifter with a mysterious past, must decide whether to stay and help Elias protect the town or continue his life on the road. Justice in Redstone is a tale of courage, resilience, and the enduring fight for what's right in a world where the odds are often stacked against you. It's a story of family, community, and the bonds that hold people together in the face of adversity. As the dust settles and the sun rises over Redstone, the question remains: can justice truly prevail in a land as wild and unpredictable as the West? This is a story of the frontier, a story of love, loss, and the unbreakable spirit of those who dared to carve out a life in the untamed wilderness. Welcome to Redstone, where every choice matters, every action has consequences, and every heart beats with the hope of a brighter tomorrow. Chapter 1. Justice in Redstone. The town of Redstone was alive with tension as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. The streets were lined with wagons and horses, and townsfolk gathered in small clusters, murmuring in hushed tones. All eyes were on the courthouse, a modest wooden building that stood at the center of town. Today was a day of reckoning, the trial of Caleb Halston and his gang. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with anticipation. Marshal Elias Gray stood near the front, his silver star gleaming on his chest. His sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the crowd that had packed the benches. Ranchers, shopkeepers, and townsfolk had all come to witness the trial. For many, it wasn't just about the Halston gang. It was about sending a message that law and order still had a place in the Wyoming Territory. At the defendant's table sat Caleb Halston and 3 of his men, their hands bound in iron shackles. Caleb, a broad-shouldered man with a dark beard and cold eyes, sat with an air of defiance, his lips curled in a faint smirk. His men, however, looked less confident, their eyes darting nervously around the room. At the front of the room, Circuit Judge Mallory Wiley presided over the proceedings. She was a striking figure, tall and composed, with a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce through any attempt at deception. Her reputation preceded her, known for her unyielding sense of justice and her ability to command respect in even the roughest of frontier towns. Judge Wiley rapped her gavel, and the room fell silent. "This court is now in session," she announced, her voice firm and steady. "The case before us is the territory of Wyoming versus Caleb Halston and his associates, charged with cattle rustling, theft, and conspiracy. Marshal Gray, you may proceed." Elias stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He carried himself with the calm authority of a man who had seen his share of danger. "Your Honor," he began, "the defendants were apprehended after a series of cattle thefts targeting the Big B Ranch and other properties in the area. We have witnesses, evidence, and a confession from one of the gang members." Caleb Halston leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening. "Confession, huh? Let me guess. It's Jed. Always was the weak one." Judge Wiley's sharp gaze landed on Caleb. "Mr. Halston, you will remain silent unless addressed by the court." Caleb shrugged, but the smirk faded. Elias continued, unperturbed. "Jed Halston, one of the defendants, admitted to his involvement in the thefts and identified Caleb Halston as the leader of the operation. We also recovered stolen cattle, branded with the Big B Ranch's mark, from a canyon near the Halston gang's camp. Judge Wiley nodded. Very well. Let's hear from the witnesses. The first witness was Emily Batten, owner of the Big B Ranch. She stepped forward, her boots clicking against the floor as she approached the stand. Dressed in a simple blouse and a jean skirt, with her blonde hair tied back, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent her life fighting for what was hers. State your name for the record, Judge Wiley said. Emily Batten, she replied, her voice steady. Miss Batten, can you describe the events that led to the capture of the defendants? Emily nodded. For weeks, cattle had been disappearing from my ranch. At first, we thought it might be stray animals, but the tracks told a different story. My brother, Marshal Gray, and I started tracking the rustlers. We found them camped out near the river with my cattle in their possession. With the help of Caleb Boone, we confronted them and brought them back to Redstone. And were you able to identify the defendants as the rustlers? Yes, Emily said, her blue eyes narrowing as she glanced at Caleb. Caleb Halston was leading the group. He didn't even try to deny it. Caleb chuckled, earning a sharp glare from Judge Wiley. Thank you, Miss Batten, the judge said. You may step down. The next witness was Caleb Boone, a tracker and longtime friend of the Batten family. He confirmed Emily's account, adding details about the tracks and the stolen cattle. His testimony was calm and methodical, leaving little room for doubt. Finally, Elias called Jed Halston to the stand. The younger Halston brother looked pale and nervous as he took his seat, his hands trembling slightly. State your name, Judge Wiley instructed. Jed Halston, he mumbled. Mr. Halston, Elias said, you've already confessed to your involvement in the thefts. Can you confirm for the court who was leading the operation? Jed hesitated, his eyes darting to Caleb. His older brother's glare was enough to make him shrink in his seat. Mr. Halston, Judge Wiley said, her voice sharp, you are under oath. If you lie to this court, you will face additional charges. Jed swallowed hard, then nodded. It was Caleb, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He planned everything, told us where to go, what to take. Caleb's fists clenched, but he said nothing. After the witnesses had been heard, Judge Wiley called for a brief recess. The courtroom buzzed with quiet conversation as the townsfolk speculated about the outcome. Emily sat beside Elias, her hands folded in her lap. Do you think she'll convict them? She asked quietly. Elias nodded. She will. The evidence is solid, and Jed's testimony sealed it. Across the room, Walker Wiley leaned against the wall, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He had stayed in town to see the trial through, though he kept to himself for the most part. Emily wasn't sure what to make of him, but she was grateful for his help in bringing the Halston gang to justice. When the court reconvened, Judge Wiley wasted no time. She rapped her gavel, and the room fell silent. Caleb Halston and Associates, she began, her voice firm. This court finds you guilty of cattle rustling, theft, and conspiracy. Your actions have caused harm not only to the Batten family, but to the entire community of Redstone. The law in this territory is clear, and it will be upheld. She turned her gaze to Caleb. You, Mr. Halston, are sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. Your associates will serve 5 years each. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck the wood, and the room erupted in murmurs. As the Halston gang was led away in chains, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Justice had been served, and the Big B Ranch was safe, for now. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. It's over, Em. She nodded, though she knew the fight wasn't truly over. The West was a dangerous place, and there would always be men like Caleb Halston. But for now, she could breathe a little easier, knowing that the law had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, the sun shone brightly, casting the town of Redstone in a warm, golden light. It was a new day, and for Emily Batten, it was a step toward a brighter future. Chapter 2. The Weight of the Gavel. The courthouse in Redstone was quiet now, the crowd having dispersed after the sentencing. The Halston gang had been led away in chains, their fates sealed by Judge Mallory Wiley's firm hand. But for the judge, her work was far from over. Justice was not just about the verdict. It was about ensuring the punishment fit the crime and that the message of law and order resonated far beyond the courthouse walls. Judge Wiley sat in her chambers, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. Her desk was cluttered with papers, case files, legal documents, and letters from other towns in the Wyoming territory requesting her presence. She leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes scanning the sentencing report she had just finalized. The Halston gang's crimes were not just about stolen cattle. They were about the erosion of trust in a community that was already struggling to survive in the harsh frontier. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Marshal Elias Gray stepped inside, his hat in hand. "Judge Wiley," he said, his voice steady. "I wanted to thank you for the way you handled the trial. The people of Redstone needed to see that justice could still be served." Judge Wiley nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Marshal, justice is only as strong as the people who enforce it. You and your sister did the hard work of bringing the Halston gang to trial. I simply ensured the law was upheld." Elias sat down, his expression thoughtful. "Still, it's not every day you see a judge willing to come all the way out here to a town like Redstone. Most would have sent word for us to handle it ourselves." Judge Wiley allowed herself a small smile. "The law doesn't stop at the edge of civilization, Marshal. If we let it falter in places like Redstone, it won't be long before it falters everywhere." Elias nodded, his respect for the judge growing. "What happens next? With the Halston gang, I mean." Judge Wiley folded her hands on the desk. "Caleb Halston and his men will be transported to the territorial prison in Laramie. There, they'll serve their sentences. 10 years of hard labor for Caleb, 5 for the others. It's not an easy life, but it's a fair punishment for their crimes." Elias frowned slightly. "And what about Jed? He cooperated, gave testimony against his brother. Does that count for anything?" The judge's gaze softened, though her tone remained firm. "Jed Halston made his choices, Marshal. While his cooperation was taken into account during sentencing, he was still complicit in the thefts. 5 years is a lenient sentence considering the damage done. Perhaps it will give him time to reflect and choose a better path when he's released." Elias leaned back in his chair, his fingers tracing the brim of his hat. "I hope you're right. Jed's young. He might still have a chance to turn things around." Judge Wiley nodded. "That's the hope, Marshal. But the law must be consistent. If we start bending it for one person, we risk undermining it for everyone." The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared responsibility settling over them. Outside, the sounds of the town drifted through the open window, children laughing, horses' hooves clattering on the dirt road, the distant hum of conversation. Redstone was alive again, its people moving forward after the trial. Finally, Elias stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Thank you, Judge Wiley, for everything." She inclined her head. "Thank you, Marshal, and give my regards to your sister. She's a strong woman. Redstone is lucky to have her." Elias smiled faintly. "I'll tell her. Safe travels, Judge." As he left, Judge Wiley returned to her papers, her mind already turning to the next case. The frontier was vast, and there was no shortage of disputes, crimes, and injustices to address. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Halston gang's sentencing was a victory, not just for the Batten family, but for the entire town of Redstone. The next morning, the town gathered once more, this time to witness the departure of the prisoners. A wagon stood in front of the courthouse, its iron bars glinting in the sunlight. Caleb Halston and his men were loaded inside, their shackles clinking with every step. Jed Halston hesitated as he climbed aboard, his eyes scanning the crowd. For a moment, his gaze met Emily Batten's. She held his stare, her expression unreadable, before turning away. Marshal Gray stood beside the wagon, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "Let's move out," he said to the driver. As the wagon rolled away, the townsfolk watched in silence. Some felt relief, others satisfaction, and a few, like Emily, felt a lingering unease. Justice had been served, but the scars left by the Halston gang would take time to heal. Emily turned to Elias, her voice quiet. "Do you think this will change anything? Or will someone else just take their place?" Elias sighed, his eyes on the horizon. "There will always be men like Caleb, Em. But as long as there are people willing to stand up to them, the law will hold. That's what matters." Emily nodded, though her heart remained heavy. The West was a harsh and unforgiving place, but for now, Redstone had found a measure of peace, and for Emily, that was enough. As the wagon disappeared into the distance, Judge Wiley prepared to leave Redstone, her work here done. But she knew the fight for justice was never truly over. The frontier was vast, and the law was fragile. It would take people like her, like Elias, and like Emily to keep it alive. And so, with her gavel packed away and her resolve as strong as ever, Judge Mallory Wiley set her sights on the next town, the next trial, and the next chance to uphold the law in the untamed West. Chapter 3. A Spark in Redstone. The sun dipped low over Redstone, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The town, still buzzing from the trial, began to settle into its usual rhythm. The courthouse stood quiet now, its doors closed, but the echoes of justice lingered in the air. For Emily Batten, however, the day was far from over. She stood on the porch of the Batten boarding house, a modest but welcoming two-story building that had been her family's livelihood for years. The scent of fresh bread wafted from the kitchen where her mother, Angela Batten, was busy preparing supper. Her father, Pastor Devin Batten, was seated in his favorite rocking chair, his Bible open on his lap. He was a tall, wiry man with a kind face and a voice that could calm even the most restless soul. "Emily," Angela called from the kitchen, her voice warm but firm. "Don't just stand there, dear. Supper's almost ready, and we've got guests tonight." Emily smiled faintly and stepped inside, brushing the dust from her skirt. "Yes, Ma, I'll set the table." Angela Batten was a force of nature, a woman who could run a boarding house, raise a family, and still find time to bake the best pies in the Wyoming Territory. Her sandy hair was streaked with gray, and her hands bore the marks of years of hard work, but her eyes sparkled with a quiet strength. As Emily moved to the dining room, her father looked up from his Bible. "How are you holding up, Em?" he asked gently. "I'm fine, Pa," she replied, though her voice carried a hint of weariness. "It's just been a long day." Devin nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Justice is never easy, but it's necessary. You and Elias did good work bringing those men to trial." Emily didn't respond, but her father's words gave her a small measure of comfort. She busied herself with setting the table, her mind wandering to the events of the day and to Caleb Boone. Caleb Boone had been a friend of the Batten family for years, but lately Emily had found herself noticing him in a different light. He was a rugged man, with sharp features and a quiet confidence that came from years of tracking and surviving in the wilderness. He had been instrumental in capturing the Halston gang, and his calm, steady presence had been a source of strength for Emily during the trial. As if summoned by her thoughts, Caleb appeared at the door, his hat in hand. "Evening, Miss Batten," he said, his voice low and warm. "Evening, Caleb," she replied, her cheeks flushing slightly. "You're just in time for supper." He smiled, a rare expression that softened his otherwise serious demeanor. "I wouldn't miss it. Your ma's cooking is the best in town." Angela appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Caleb. Now come on in and sit down." As the family and their guests gathered around the table, the conversation flowed easily. Caleb sat beside Emily, and though they didn't speak much, there was a quiet understanding between them. Every now and then their eyes would meet, and Emily felt a warmth she couldn't quite explain. After supper, as the others lingered over coffee and pie, Caleb and Emily stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cool, and the stars shone brightly overhead. "Thank you for everything you did," Emily said softly, breaking the silence. "We couldn't have brought the Halston gang to justice without you." Caleb shrugged, his hands in his pockets. "I just did what needed to be done. You and Elias did the hard part." Emily smiled, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "Still, I'm grateful. It's not easy standing up to men like Caleb Halston." Caleb glanced at her, his expression serious. "You're stronger than you think, Emily. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and for a moment the world seemed to fade away. But before she could respond, the sound of laughter from inside the house brought them back to reality. Meanwhile, in the parlor, Elias Gray sat with Walker Wiley, the quiet drifter who had helped bring the Halston gang to justice. Walker was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had proven himself reliable and capable, and Elias had been considering asking him to stay on as his deputy. "You ever thought about settling down, Walker?" Elias asked, leaning back in his chair. Walker raised an eyebrow, his hat tilted low over his face. "Not much of a settler, Marshal. I'm more used to the road." Elias nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get that, but Redstone could use a man like you. The town's growing, and I can't keep the peace on my own. You've got the skills, and you've got the sense. Think about it." Walker didn't respond right away, his gaze fixed on the fire crackling in the hearth. Finally, he said, "I'll think on it, but I'm not making any promises." "That's all I ask," Elias replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. As the evening wore on, the Batten boarding house grew quiet. Emily stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the stars. Her thoughts drifted to Caleb, to the way his presence made her feel safe and grounded. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. Downstairs, Angela and Devon sat together, their hands intertwined. They had built a life in Redstone, a life filled with challenges and triumphs. And though the road ahead was uncertain, they knew their family was strong enough to face whatever came their way. And in the shadows of the town, Walker Wiley stood alone, his mind turning over Elias's words. Redstone was a good place, and the people here were worth protecting. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running and put down roots. As the town of Redstone slept, the seeds of new beginnings were quietly taking root. For Emily and Caleb, for Elias and Walker, and for the Batten family, the future was unwritten, but it was full of promise. Chapter 4. A New Dawn in Redstone. The morning sun rose over Redstone, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The town was beginning to stir, with shopkeepers opening their doors and ranchers heading out to tend their herds. At the Batten boarding house, the smell of fresh coffee and biscuits filled the air as Angela Batten prepared breakfast for her family and their guests. Emily was already up, her blonde hair tied back in a loose braid as she helped her mother in the kitchen. She moved with purpose, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on Caleb Boone. The memory of their quiet conversation on the porch lingered in her mind, and she couldn't help but wonder if he felt the same spark she did. "Emily," Angela said, breaking her daughter's reverie, "are you going to stand there daydreaming, or are you going to take this coffee out to the table?" Emily blinked, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. "Sorry, Ma, I'll take it out." Angela gave her a knowing smile but said nothing. She had noticed the way Emily and Caleb had been looking at each other lately, and though she didn't say it aloud, she approved. Caleb was a good man, steady, dependable, and kind. Exactly the kind of man her daughter deserved. At the breakfast table, Pastor Devon Batten was deep in conversation with Caleb, who had stayed the night at the boarding house. The two men had always gotten along well, and Devon appreciated Caleb's quiet wisdom. "You've been a blessing to this town, Caleb," Devon said, his voice warm. "Not just with the Halston gang, but with everything you've done for the people here. You've got a good heart." Caleb shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what I can, Pastor. Redstone's been good to me, too." Devon nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Have you ever thought about settling down, finding a place to call home?" Caleb hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly to Emily, who was setting a plate of biscuits on the table. "I've thought about it," he admitted, "but I've spent so much of my life on the move, I'm not sure I'd know how to stay in one place." Devon smiled. "Sometimes it's not about knowing how, it's about finding the right reason to stay." Caleb didn't respond, but his mind was already turning over the pastor's words. Later that day, Emily found herself in the stables, brushing down her horse. The rhythmic motion of the brush was soothing, and she welcomed the quiet moment to herself. But her solitude didn't last long. "Morning, Miss Batten," came Caleb's familiar voice. Emily turned to see him leaning against the stable door, his hat in hand. "Morning, Caleb," she replied, her heart skipping a beat. "What brings you here?" "Just thought I'd check on the horses," he said, stepping inside. "And maybe see how you're doing." Emily smiled, her hands stilling on the horse's flank. "I'm fine, just trying to keep busy." Caleb nodded, his gaze steady. "You've been through a lot lately. I just wanted to make sure you're all right." "I am," she said softly. "Thanks to you." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Finally, Caleb took a step closer. "Emily, I know I'm not much of a talker, but I want you to know, I admire you. The way you've handled everything with the ranch, the trial, you're stronger than most people I've met." Emily's cheeks flushed, and she looked down, her fingers brushing against the horse's mane. "I don't feel strong most of the time, but thank you." Caleb reached out, his hand gently touching hers. "You are, Emily, and if you ever need someone to lean on, I'm here." Her breath caught at his words, and when she looked up, their eyes met. For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. But before either of them could say anything more, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. "Emily!" Elias's voice called from outside. "You in there?" Emily stepped back, her hand slipping from Caleb's. "I'm here, Elias!" she called, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. Elias appeared in the doorway, his expression serious. "Walker and I need to head out to the North Ridge. There's been talk of rustlers in the area, and I want to check it out." Emily frowned. "Do you think it's another gang?" "Could be," Elias said. "Or it could just be rumors. Either way, I'd rather be sure." Caleb straightened, his demeanor shifting to one of quiet determination. I'll come with you. Elias nodded. Appreciate it, Caleb. We'll leave in an hour. As Elias turned to leave, Caleb glanced back at Emily. We'll talk later, he said softly, before following Elias out of the stable. Emily watched him go, her heart heavy with both hope and worry. The West was a dangerous place, and every ride carried the risk of not coming back. But she knew Caleb was capable, and she trusted him and Elias to handle whatever lay ahead. Meanwhile, Elias and Walker prepared for the ride. The two men had grown closer over the past few days, and Elias had come to respect Walker's quiet strength and sharp instincts. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Walker, Elias said as they saddled their horses. I meant what I said last night. I think you'd make a fine deputy. Walker adjusted his hat, his expression unreadable. Still thinking on it, Marshal. I'm not sure I'm cut out for the badge. Elias chuckled. You've already been doing the job, whether you realize it or not. You've got the skills, and you've got the sense. That's more than I can say for most men. Walker smirked faintly. I'll take that as a compliment. It is, Elias said. But take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Walker nodded, his gaze distant. He wasn't used to staying in one place, but Redstone was starting to feel different. Maybe it was the people, or maybe it was the sense of purpose he'd found here. Either way, he knew he had a decision to make. As the day wore on, the town of Redstone carried on as it always did, its people working, laughing, and living their lives. But for Emily, Caleb, Elias, and Walker, the future felt uncertain, full of challenges, but also full of possibilities. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting the town in a warm golden light, Emily stood on the porch of the boarding house, her thoughts once again drifting to Caleb. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. Thanks for riding along, partner. If you enjoyed this tale from the wild frontier, give us a like and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Until next time, keep your boots dusty and your aim true.